Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's DMI call. Thanks for joining. And as usual, the call is public and recorded and will be shared on YouTube. So please be mindful of the comments you make and the information you share with the team. There's a few things that I want to discuss with everybody and what is the state of these different things. So the first one is the startup configuration. Amit, if I'm not mistaken, there was a discussion about you submitting a proposal on this.
Sorry, Andrea, I have lost context of that. But what I remember is that the only pending thing out there was to somehow convey that the URL is an optional parameter.
Yes.
But apart from that, I don't think anything else is open. For that part, I have not been able to work on it. I will look into it in this week.
Okay.
To convey that it's optional.
Yeah. That's fine. It's no big problem. Also, in relationship with the device unreachability, some of the suggestions that Holger made, what do you think?
I need to review this in terms of the codes, the error responses or error codes that we already have. And from my understanding perspective, I think this sounds fine to me.
Okay. So
I mean, I would prefer a return code which states that the device is not reachable. Because it can be for some RPCs, you will get then an internal error back, which might not help you. I mean, if you get a device offline or something or unreachable, you know that you might retry.
Okay, but in that case, I think this return code would be there for all the RPCs, right?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, not for start managing device, not for stop managing device, for example, but
no, even for start managing device, if you can't reach the device,
then it will not return. Yeah, it will only return after it has reached the device. At least that's our implementation and my understanding. I mean, I'm fine with internal error. It's just that customers of the device manager may have it easier if they see what the problem was.
You're referring to this one?
Yeah.
So I think, Andrea, just to as a recap for everyone, right? I think the problem, what Holger is saying is that right now the error code that is available is internal error. And if a device is unreachable, it just signals an internal error. But a suggestion is that we have an explicit error code saying that device is unreachable. And
yes.
Yeah, and it will be applicable for almost all the RPCs. Okay.
Yep.
So I think we have a consensus on introducing a new error reason, right? It's unreachable.
Okay. And what about this? And what about if it exists but is not reachable? Do we use device unreachable or an internal error? The one I've highlighted.
Yeah, so that is the case where if it exists but not reachable, we would return a device unreachable.
Okay.
And if it does not exist, that's the first case where you say it's an unknown device altogether.
Okay.
Any other comments, or do we close on this one saying that, okay, we'll make this change?
It's fine for me.
Yeah, I think we're fine. We can just make the change and call it a day in that sense.
Okay.
Will you make the changes, Amit?
Yeah, I can work on it. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Perfect.
Send it to me.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. So the other time we were talking about a little bit more specification around what we can do in terms of detailing what an internal error is. Have we given some thought on what are the cases where we would need to specify the cause of an internal error and have an enumeration for that? The thing is, I would augment the enumeration of the errors if we can, as much as possible, instead of creating the string as I said the other day. But I would like to get a proposal on what are the missing things that we have not been implementing and that are not already existing in the enumeration that we cannot use, I guess. Am I making myself clear or not?
Are you suggesting the reason for these errors is we have an internal error code as well? And that internal error code maps to a reason which also may be returned as part of the response. So you get kind of a standard HTTP 500, if you will. And then on top of that, you have our internal reason code plus the string for that reason.
I would say not a string, but an enumeration of things. Instead of, what I'm saying is that instead of returning internal error, if we find places where we can specify a better error code, we just extend the existing enumeration of error codes with that error code.
Yeah, so I think an enumeration doesn't make any sense, because in that case you should add these error codes to the other errors which are already there, error codes. So why introduce another enumeration just for internal errors?
Yeah, that is what I was suggesting. I was thinking that we could just augment the existing enum.
Yeah.
No?
So, I mean, I think when we talked about this last time, so I think that this question didn't come from me, but I already asked about this some weeks or months ago. I mean, my intention was if we have additional errors which are not, this was just to give a hint what, I mean, if we run out of memory or something, there is no error out of memory or out of socket descriptors or out of file handles, out of, I don't know what. I mean, you will probably find then these error codes somewhere in our log files, but these are maybe hard to find. So that's why I thought, why not just put it in an additional string and send it upwards, and then somebody can tell me, are you responded with internal error, no file handles left or something. Then I know something. Now he says it's internal error, and I could say, yeah, okay, perhaps the device was offline, which is the case right now. So, and I have to look into the log file every time. This is, yeah, this was my intention for it. I know that you guys are not very much in favor of it. It is a little bit like these Windows error codes, like error 547 happened or something. And nobody knows what it is except Microsoft, perhaps.
Well, but do you think that's actually needed from an operator perspective? Because at that point, the operator can, like, the real only thing that it can do is either reboot the hardware or there's very little thing that it can do
but-
if you're out of memory.
Yeah, but at the same time, he will write a trouble ticket telling me that there was an internal error while he was doing that. And then it's hard for me to tell him, or to, it will make the life easier for me because I have perhaps some additional information.
No, but as in, just if you look at it from a very high level, right? So, so the problem, say for example, is that the DM is running out of resources, right? Why should someone have to look into some other service to find this problem? As in, why do we need to look into the user of DM to give us a hint as to what the problem in the DM is?
I didn't follow that quite. What do you mean by look at
So-
the user of the DM to find out what the problem is?
So okay, what I'm trying to say is that if the user of the DM can't really do anything with that error code except for logging it, right? Then does it really make sense as to pass that specific error? It can be like any generic error, right? So
If
for
I get a
example,
generic error as a user, though, is it something I retry? Is it something? So if what do I say? If it's an out of memory error, and all I get is internal server error back,
that's yeah.
what do I do, right? As a user, I don't. Do I keep pressing the button and retry it, or because I don't know if I can't even tell if it's a temporary error that may fix itself, or or it's a permanent thing that there's just no hope of getting the system back to operational state. So giving a user some sort of hint of what's going on isn't necessarily a bad thing. So if I get an out of memory error, that might, okay, I got to reboot. But if I get a communication disrupted error back as generic error, I may go check the wires.
Great,
So
yeah.
there's different things I'm going to do depending on what that error message says.
Great, yeah. Yeah, so I think I'm also saying the same thing. So where the user, right, of the service can take a specific action, right, then it's really good to say that this is the specific error. So you could say out of resources or whatever, right? But in the case that the user can't do anything and that error code can be used only for logging, right? And that is where a string comes in more handy, as Holger is saying. So I don't know how much that really helps, right? Because if we have to find out a problem in the DM, I think it's more pertinent to look into the logs of the DM and not the logs of the user of DM, right?
I mean, but I share Holger's frustration with Windows error messages, right? Where you get some sort of code and you're like, what happened? And there's no place to even look up the code. And I understand that we're suggesting that there is a place to look up the code, but if I'm going to look up the code, why can't you just tell me what that code means? Particularly if I'm going to still have a separate code for out of memory versus, I don't know, a bad CPU versus out of file descriptors. If the code's going to tell me it, you might as well give you the message too.
Yeah, this is one reason, but yeah, the other reason is that I think that, yeah, take for example, updating the startup configuration. In our case, this is an XML file you put on your server, and we are downloading the XML file, we are looking into the XML file, we are uploading it to the device, and there are several things which can go wrong by doing that. Because there's something wrong with the configuration file, or there's something wrong with the current configuration on the device, but actually, perhaps it could be invalid XML, it could be, there are several reasons. And I mean, and if you're putting some XML file for our configuration on your server, and then you will only get one message back telling you that the file is not okay, that's all. And you have no clue what to, okay, you could then look into our log files, but then you always have to look in our log files, which are not easy to read for you. But if it would say that the XML is incorrect, you would know, I have to look up my XML file if it's correct, or if it tells you that the XML cannot be applied to the device, it must be something else. Or this is what I'm thinking about. And because this is totally depending on our device and the way we use startup configurations, so this is not something I would like to standardize, this error code. I mean, not everybody is using XML and can validate at all. And so I don't think that it makes sense to standardize the exact error code we have to return here, and it would be more flexible too.
Well, you can have an invalid startup config error. That's a valid error that can be used by anybody, and then
I think we have that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we have that error. But for example, for us, there has to be a version in the startup configuration, a version string, and if it's not there, then it's invalid. So there are just several options. The format is not okay from the version or something.
The whole point is that does the operator need to really care about all of this? Because if the OSS and BSS that uses this thing gets an invalid configuration, then somebody will know that they messed up and they should change things. If you go down and specify it too much, it becomes vendor proprietary effectively, as you described, and the OSS BSS can't really do anything about it because like yeah.
Okay, but I have the feeling that we probably will not agree on something here. So why not keep it as it is? And if there's really a need to change something, then we will do this later on.
Yeah, I would agree.
I mean, if we really have some experiences with these guys in real scenarios and there's a lot of traffic, and perhaps you're right, everything is fine, and then this would be effort wasted.
So from my perspective, right, I am not totally against having a string being returned, but what I'm more thinking about is how do I use it as the user of DM, right? The maximum what I could do is I could log it, but apart from that, there isn't much that I could do with it.
Yeah, you can tell me when you call me and tell me, oh, something went wrong, and this is what you got back, and I can tell, you did. You remember you have to do that and that.
So where might these errors, other than these logs, where might these errors be displayed though? It is the user interface to this, let's say it's a web UI. If it's a web UI, then that log message, that string could be there. And I can see kind of standard, back to the example of config, a standard config error message, config, something wrong with config, that's a standard message with the string that says no version number found, right? Having that pop up in a window. If it's a CLI tool that I'm interacting with, that would be the message would be printed back out at the CLI. So I don't think these would just be something that are logged and the user would get just a generic response, yes?
Yeah, but the other aspect to that is because it's a string, it would be again something which is specific to an implementation of the device or the device manager. So for example, in case of Atran, it would be a different string. And in case of say HCore, it would be a different string. In case of Atran, it could say, okay, XML file not found, just as an example, right? In case of HCore, maybe there is no concept of an XML file altogether. So I think we are exposing quite a bit of details, or we could expose quite a bit of those details through the string to the end user. But again, I think it's a call whether it should be done or not.
Right, but again, if the string becomes kind of more detailed under a standard user code or return code, error code, whatever. So the standard error code is bad config, but the reason gives more detail, i.e. no version, bad XML format, whatever. Okay. Therefore, the northbound say, okay, he can't parse every individual string, but he can look at the general error code, right? It is a configuration file issue. And that northbound makes decisions on that, but he can also give the user the more information, the more detailed based on the string.
The issue that I see is that we put a string in there, which I might be fine with. I like it. I mean, it's definitely something that if a CLI, a UI, you put a string there, you print it, it's nice. But then what happens when the operator decides, oh, let me take an action item on that? It becomes vendor specific. Let's take the example that we just made, the add-tran and the XML. If the arrow string is invalid XML or something else, let's take invalid XML. If you parse that invalid XML, as Amit said, Edgecore might have no knowledge of that invalid XML. So effectively, when the OSS BSS is parsing that invalid XML, is becoming tied to the add-tran implementation. Unless it wants to parse every possible string ever.
Right. The OSS BSS may never parse it, but it's also not been unheard of where OSS BSS does that, because it's a customized OSS BSS and the operator knows those strings, right? And the operator, so it's not unheard of. And it's up to the author of the OSS BSS to work with the vendor to say, look, I want to do more with your error strings. Maybe I'm going to pressure the vendor to come up in that string to have a error code in it as the first 5 digits or the first 5 characters followed by the string, right? But that's their right to do that.
Yes, David, I see. But the whole point is that we should be the ones doing the standardization. It shouldn't be the operator going to the vendor.
We are doing the standardization at the general level, but we're not going to be able to standardize all errors. There's just no way. I mean, even when we look at HTTP, right? I get a 500 error back. I can also, along with that 500, get a specific error message back from code from the application that says why there's a 500 error, right? So the standardization's at the 500, not at the text in it. And I think that's maybe where we standardize. We come up with a bunch of generic error codes and we standardize on those, and we recommend people use that information. But if a vendor wants to add additional information, that's a way for a vendor that can differentiate themselves. Maybe it's helpful for their users, so they do that. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. And you're right, if a BSS OSS decides to start parsing those strings, it's woe to them when the vendor changes the strings, but that's their choice.
Okay. Then maybe we put in the string and we document it saying, if you parse it, go to hell. Something like that. It's your issue. Then if something changes and it's not working anymore.
Yeah,
right. It becomes a vendor or possibly vendor specific string.
You could name it something like a display reason or something like that, or display string or something like that.
Or vendor detail.
Yeah, vendor details also good. And we should document the fact that it shouldn't be like no action should be taken automatically by parsing the string. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, what you're going to say is internally there's best practice for ONF code that it's not using those strings. And we saw what happens in Volta, right? When you start parsing the reason string, right? So internally, we know that we're not using those strings as branching points in logic. But we can't, if an external system wants to do that, we can't prevent that from happening.
No, we cannot prevent that from happening, but at least my conscience is clear if we document it properly.
And that's fair, and we can document it such that we say, look, if these strings could change and are not controlled by the standard. So using them in decision-making logic could make your code incompatible in the future.
But so the other thing is that with all these architectures and things like that, right? So we would ideally want to have Elasticsearch and the Kibana and log correlation and things like that, right? So using all of that, shouldn't it be other things which would give easily way to figure out what the actual problem is, and just not relying on that one string being passed through the multiple interfaces? Because if I take the specific use case, right, from the DM, if the string is returned to say the component, the DM user, it would have to go through, I don't know, maybe some 3-4 more layers before it finally reaches the end user or the end operator, human operator, right? And this pipe needs to be created through all these interfaces. So, and this ultimately is serving only for the debuggability, right? Saying that, okay, if there is a failure, then this would help. What I'm trying to question is that shouldn't it be through log correlation and other mechanisms through which you debug the system or failures of this sort?
I would agree that quite possibly you're going to use logs for debugging. Again, my understanding was this message was going to get to the user, right? It's part of the experience of an application. So when something goes wrong, you don't leave the operator in the dark, and that's kind of what I think this is going to. Even if the operator can do nothing about the error, as a user, I feel better, at least understanding what went wrong with the system, rather than just getting a 500 and no more detail, right? That doesn't tell me anything. That just says something's broken. It's like when you take your car to the dealer, you don't want to know just something's broken. Well, maybe you do. Maybe people do. I like to know what's broken. But maybe some people just want to know the car's broken and the guys can fix it. I like to know what's broken and what it's going to fix. And it's kind of that user feel. So even if I can't fix the car myself, I like to know what's broken. It's a user experience issue in some sense. And it might be that if I can tell what's broken, it might be something I can fix. Like when it may just mean the gas cap needs tightened. Well, I can fix that if you tell me that's what it is, as opposed to just show up the little error light on the dashboard. And so some of these might be able to be addressed by the operator, might not, but I do think that message needs to get to the operator.
Okay, so I think we will go with the suggestion that we add a vendor detail, a string field called vendor detail, with the documentation as Andrea was suggesting, that this should not be parsed or interpreted, but can be used only for display purposes.
If I remember correctly, but I could be wrong as usual, there is something like that already in normal gRPC calls. So I think they have a richer error model which already uses these strings. If this would be the case, could we simply use those strings as well, or do we want to really include our own? I mean, the problem is, and you cannot say then that it's vendor specific or something, but this could then come out of the box and you wouldn't have to do anything for it.
If it's a common string, then maybe it needs a common error code. I'd go that far, right? If it's something that multiple vendors are going to pass back, then it might be something that we standardize in error code.
No, that's not what I meant. I thought that gRPC already has means for returning an additional string in a reply.
In the
So
error
that we
reply.
wouldn't, yeah. I can look it up again.
Yeah.
So that would be part of the gRPC error, right? The error variable that you return. But I think we will again come to the same problem, right? For the normal RPCs, that's fine, but for the streaming responses, how do you return the error in that case? We would have to rely on the response structure.
And also, Holger, that would that is part of the gRPC errors, but it couldn't use our enumeration because that's not known to gRPC at all. Or am I mistaken?
I think he may, Holger, and you correct me if I'm wrong, are you talking about just kind of adding metadata to the return response?
Yeah.
And
I thought it's already there. We only have to use it, but I may be wrong.
there's some, yeah, I mean, you can set a message and add details, and I think that just gets encoded as metadata. I'd have to look at the Go interface to figure out how that's being done. And that metadata can actually be pretty much anything. It's, I mean, are we just saying, hey, can we use the standard metadata to return this information? And if so, we can, you know, it's return that code and whatever metadata as well, I guess. I'm not quite sure I understand what you're asking, I guess.
Okay, what about if I look it up again and write something in chat or discuss this with, I mean, otherwise Amit would probably have to add this string then, right?
Oh, okay. You're saying this would be a way to prevent adding it to every interface.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can get behind that. If there's a way that we don't have to augment every interface with a vendor detail string, and maybe just put that in the metadata so it's always passed back, that would probably be a good approach.
But this would then not be related to internal error, but this could be then used for anything. So this might be not what we want, but I will look it up after the meeting, and perhaps I'm totally wrong here. Sorry for the confusion. It's okay.
Okay. Okay. The specific component types patch that has been merged, right, Amit? Or am I mistaken?
I'm not sure if it has been merged. I thought we got a couple of +1s, but it's not yet merged, I think.
Ah, yes, it's still here.
I think we wanted to have a discussion in the Brigade and then merge.
Ah, yes. Then please maybe go take it away.
Yeah, so can I open the file SW product?
Yep.
Yeah, so this patch set, can I scroll down? No, come down to the component structure. Yeah, so this patch set basically addresses one of the JIRAs that we created, where we said that for some of the components, we need specific attributes, or we need more information than what is available as a generic component. So this was discussed in the earlier Brigade meetings, and the suggestion was that we use strong typed gRPC structures, or protos, sorry, to model these specific attributes. So as part of that, what I did is the 4 that we at least have some use cases for, which are coming from our Deutsche Telekom's requirements. So we have tried to model those. So attributes of a port, of a container, which could house a PSU or a fan or any container, a power supply unit and a transceiver. For this, we went ahead and did, model the specific attributes. So if you go above, so yeah, so in the component I have put a one off specific. So depending on the type of the component, one of these could be present inside the component, and those are defined above. So they are pretty lightweight. They don't have too many things in there. So Andre, if you could just go up, let me just
Yes.
walk through the attributes. Yeah, to start with, the first one is the port. All right, so a port would have a connector type. So there's an enum for the connector types. Port would have a speed, the protocol that is getting used on this port, and a port would have a physical label as is marked on the box. Right, and these are for ports which are inbuilt onto the box. So there would be other ports as well, which would be coming from or which would be coming off an SFP, so coming from a pluggable. So that is coming down in the transceiver. Then the next one is a container. So a container should have a physical label. So like any of the fan cages or any of the SFP cages, right? They would have a physical label, and for most cases, the operators need what is the exact label on for that particular component, so that the ground personnel can actually go and figure out, okay, which is the specific point where they need to do something. If you come down a little bit for the PSU. Yeah, for the power supply unit, right now, the only thing that came up as a requirement was to know what voltage it is supported for this power supply unit. We didn't come across any other users. So again, the idea would be like any of the other things that is happening on the DMI interface, right? As more things are needed, so we could add them to the interface, and in this case, for the specific component attributes. Okay. Then coming to the transceiver, we have a form factor for the transceiver. So it could be whatever the QSFP gives, SFP plus 28, blah, blah. And then the type. So whether it's a GPON transceiver, XGS-PON transceiver, or a Ethernet transceiver, EPON transceiver. So now because we have this form factor in the transceiver, so I have also taken out two component types. If you go up, Andrea, I have commented out. Yeah, so the component type GPON transceiver and component type XGS-PON transceiver, we don't need to call them out explicitly, because we can just keep the component type as transceiver, and in the specific for that transceiver, we could have the form factor. So we could have, sorry, not the form factor, the type as GPON or XGS-PON. So I left this code commented. Before the merge, we will take it out so that it's visible, or at least it comes up for discussion. Yep, that's all I had to say on this. Any suggestions, comments?
Amit, I have one thing basically on the SFPs, like what I have first is the pond reach, whether 5 kilometer, 10 kilometer, or 20 kilometer. I think that you taken care. Is it LCSC is what you intend to capture?
The LCSC is there in the connector type.
Okay.
So the reach of the pond, maybe Holger, you could also, I think you would know more than me on that. I think it's determined.
No, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry, I do not know.
Oh, okay. So yeah, the reach of the pond, I'm not sure what are the factors. Generally, it's 20 kilometers, right?
Generally, yes, Amit. But
yeah, for pond it is 20 kilometers, right? Up to 20.
Yeah, up to 20 kilometer. but you can have SFP that can support, let's say, 5 or 10.
Okay.
Maybe I can do some more groundwork on the, but we have here the inventory that support 5, 10, and 20.
Okay. Okay. So, okay, so what you're saying is that it is the SFP that determines this this factor, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, then I think it makes sense to have that specifically for the GPON XGS-PON.
And another attribute that SFP allows us to read from its register is the operating nanometer, whether it's
the frequency. The
wavelength.
Okay.
So you can say that it is implicitly, let's say, GPON or XGS-PON because it is standardized.
Correct.
Like NG-PON2 or Combi, it can operate at multiple wavelengths. There are possibilities. Some hardwares support. Basically, the list of supported wavelengths on that code.
Yeah, I think that could be a good addition. Yeah.
And the third point is basically on the part number. Usually the components have part number. I'm not sure. Like, if you have already included, it's fine.
The part number is something which is generic. So I think that should be there in the component structure itself.
Okay. Sure. Thanks.
So we have the serial number and the model name. So you could, so there is a comment there that the manufacturer's part number can be, the model name field itself could be used for that.
Okay, perfect, Amit. Sure. Thanks.
Okay, I'll add a comment for you, Amit, to add the reach of the fiber and the supported wavelengths.
Yeah. So Chandra, if you could send across more details on that, right? I think that would help.
Sure, Amit. I'll try to gather the info and share it across to you.
Okay, that's an action item. Yeah, so the suggestion I had some time ago for this was to maybe look at possibly using OpenConfig. So I've discussed it with Amit to a certain extent, actually, and he did some investigation and some analysis about how much we could reuse of OpenConfig here. And it is true that there is some overlap, and it is also true that OpenConfig has these attributes, but it is also most of these attributes, but it's still missing a few things. And also, using OpenConfig would mean that we would still need to extend it and add things to it. And at the moment, that is not really something that we are in the position to do. So our final agreement on this was, let's add these types and components and elements to the existing DMI, with the option that when we have gotten to the point where we understand exactly what we need, because at this point in time, we're still building the DMI, we're still like looking at it and understanding what's needed for our workflows. When that phase is done, we could possibly look at how much we would need to extend OpenConfig to use it instead of the DMI. So I think that resolves some of the issues around possibly reusing OpenConfig. Amit, did I describe this properly?
Yes, Andrea.
Perfect. Okay, so that's the OpenConfig thing. So the last item I had on the agenda was a little bit of an update from Radisys on their efforts around implementation. Chandra, do you want to give us an update? Do you have an update on that sense?
Yes, thanks, Andrea. So from Radisys, we have got started on the Open DM agent, the high-level design, and all the components that are part of the Open DM agent. basically, we expect the OpenDM agent to contain the gRPC server to talk DMI and the DMI RPC's implementation and the device configuration, inventory, and the states management, and the events and metrics thresholding and the generation of metrics events, and also high level on the software upgrade. We are just thinking through on the HLD and mapping each of the gRPC procedures and what should be the expected functionality on the device to handle the same. So on the DM agent is what Andrea, we are working now, and we are still in discussion internally on the events and metrics, whether it should be on the gRPC streams or Kafka. Like what is very clear for us, the RPC's implementation, that's what we are working, Andrea.
Okay, sounds good. Any questions for the group?
The questions I have is what community thinks on the persistence of the configuration. Let's say from the NEM, if the configuration is provided to the device and the device reboots, maybe autonomously due to maybe fan failure or whatever is the reason. If device reboots, once it comes back, do we expect device to restore its configuration, or we expect the northbound components to push it again?
I can speak about our implementation. So we are restoring the configuration on the device after it comes up again. And there's even no interface to the northbound side to signal that something went wrong.
So device is doing the restoration from its persistent volume, if I understand. Okay, thanks.
So the device manager is doing the so it's sending the configuration again to the device.
Okay. Thanks. Like one specific question we have is if the configuration is little hierarchical, let's say you apply configuration like A, B, C, D, and each being the prerequisite for the next. Like let's say D has prerequisites A, B, C to be met. So all the hierarchy as such is taken care by the device itself, is what you were saying, applying in the required order.
There's currently no.
I don't understand the question, because when you say configuration, Chandra, which specific configuration are we talking about? Because here we're talking about the DMI interface, right? And any configuration that you pass has to be through this interface. So which specific configuration are we talking about?
Yeah, the device configuration, if there is any hierarchical order of applying it. So one thing is device can build on its own, definitely, maybe maintain the configuration like a tree. Only when the prerequisite is first applied, then you apply the dependent configuration.
No, sorry. What I'm trying to say is that using the DMI, the configuration that you could push to the device as of today are limited, right? So you could have a configuration for the events and metrics, right? For the events, for the metrics, for things like where the message bus is located, the startup config, and where the logging endpoint is located, right? So, and I don't really know if there is a dependency between each of those. At least from an interface perspective, they're all independent.
Okay. So like one thing is like maybe hardware component, let's say, you apply it and then only you can do the threshold configuration applied onto that, or you can do that irrespective of the admin state.
No, so the hardware components, the components are not applied by the NEM, right? It is learned by the NEM. So when the device comes up, it has to create an inventory of what exists on the device.
Yes, Amit. Yeah, my question was like you set the admin state on the particular hardware component, and only when you set the admin state to be like enabled or active, then you may set the threshold configurations. So to report the sensor data for example.
Mhm.
So are you saying the setting of admin state and setting of the threshold configuration can be like totally, what you say, not dependent on each other, they can be performed anytime? Or is it always that only when you enable the component, you can apply the configuration on it?
Okay, so I don't think we have gone or addressed these aspects yet because we are not really looking at any of the use cases of setting the admin state or upper state or things like that. I need to check into the interface as to what exactly are the options that or flexibilities we have there. Can't recall it on top of my head, but if there is no hard requirement, why should we tie them together? Right? So,
Okay.
so for example, right, if I want to set the thresholds of an alarm, right, is it necessary that as in the fan could be or whatever, right? The component could be temporarily disabled, but I think I should be able to operate on the thresholds.
Yes, agreed, Amit. They can be again separately applied and need not be dependent on the such. Maybe like per component basis, we need to check if there are any such dependencies.
Okay. Yeah.
Interface level, I agree that they can be applied independently. At least the use cases what DMI has like gone through. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. That was one question I had on this.
Okay.
And our device manager currently does not allow to set any attributes using the device manager interface, except for metrics, alarms. And so we do not support this set. What is it called? I don't know. There's a set of one set RPC for inventory data, right? And this is currently not supported by us, so we don't have that problem.
Set hardware component info.
Yeah. Mm.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we have. Thanks for the update, Chandran. I think we have agreement on your question, so that's good. Anything else you guys wanted to discuss or bring up during the meeting? No? Then thanks everybody. I'll post the recording as usual, and I'll talk to you. I'll see if next week or the week after. It's scheduled for next week, but I might push it to the week after. Thanks everybody. Cheers. Bye bye.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.